Dear aspiring academics, welcome to the Academic Diaries, where we will talk about the different journeys people in different levels of academia take to become fully fledged professionals in their fields. My name is Itzel. I'm a third-year physics PhD student at the University of Virginia. As a beginner academic, I am curious about the paths people take to grow their careers. I hope that by asking questions to interesting people, we can learn more about all the options that we are, for now, blind to. So sit down, or walk, or wash your dishes, or maybe procrastinate that thesis you may be writing, and enjoy the chat. The inaugural interview of the series is Professor Sackett. He is my supervisor, and I could not think of a better person to start this journey with. He's a professor at the University of Virginia, where he works on developing atom interferometers using Bose-Einstein condensates. He's also the Director of Undergraduate Studies at the University of Virginia, and thus he helps and mentors many students, and he is a very kind and helpful person. Welcome, Professor Sackett.
Thank you, Itzel. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Professor Sackett, for taking time to chat with me about your academic journey. I want to know a little bit of the story of when it started that you were interested in science to your undergrad and later to your PhD. So how about we get started with, I guess, the most basic question. Were you always interested in physics?
I wouldn't necessarily say so. I was definitely always interested in science. I liked science fiction for a long time. I think it was very little. It was dinosaurs. So I think from an early age, I kind of expected I would be a scientist, but I didn't particularly gravitate towards physics right away. I mean, I liked physics in high school quite a bit, but I liked most of my science classes. It was really in college. I went to Harvey Mudd College, which is a science school. In the first couple of years, they make everyone take everything. So I took chemistry and engineering and math and physics. And actually, I liked math and physics by far the best of those. So I double majored in math and physics. And at first, I was pretty torn between them. But as it went on, I liked physics more and more. So by the end of college, it was pretty clear that I wanted to do physics.
What about physics did you prefer over math?
It's the real world parts of it, right? As you get advanced in math, it gets more and more abstract, a little more philosophical in some ways. And I enjoyed it fine, but I think in physics, the feeling that it was, you were really doing something that interacted with the world and could, change people's lives somehow, that was a sort of a draw. And the cool technology was always fun too, physics labs, you get to play with lasers and things like that.
There's so much fun that you can do with lasers that I think that's also why I went from math to physics. So you liked physics in high school, and then you went into university. What was university like for you? Did you find it difficult at moments?
Yes, but like most people who have gone to be professors, I was very good at it. I mean, I was basically at the top of my class, as many, not all professors are. But not to say that was easy. Harvey Mudd was a hard place. We spent a lot of time doing things. We had plenty of exams that I did badly on. But overall, yeah, I think it was a bit of a reinforcing experience for me that I was, in fact, kind of good at this, which is part of the reason you decide maybe you wanted to make a career. This is always the thing for teaching that everyone has to learn, is that almost everyone who becomes a teacher is just not a typical student. You have to get your head around that, and it takes a little while before that. That intellectually, but you really have to interact and really listen to what the students are saying and what they're having trouble with, and realize that, yes, these were things that did not bother me at all, actually.
Yeah, I think sometimes professors forget that some of us are mere mortals, and it can be a little bit more challenging depending on different aspects of life. That said, was there ever a class that you struggled in more than any other, even though you had good grades?
The one I struggled with was actually differential equations of all things, which seems crazy because it's just not that hard. I did really bad on the first exam in that class, and oh geez, what's the lowest score I've gotten? But then it turns out actually for that particular class, he did study sessions before the exam that were very, very helpful. I hadn't gone to that, and once I realized that, I should go to that.
That is something that I did not do in undergrad, and I do regret, is not going to office hours. I do agree that talking to the professor really makes a difference. My brother's younger than me, and I always told him when he was starting undergrad that going to office hours is the difference between an A and a B, and I still stand by that. It's very important.
I try to tell students that too. Actually, the big advice I give students are, go to office hours. Even if you don't have questions, just go and sit and listen to other people's questions. and work together with your peers, which I will say my college was super good about since we were all kind of in the same classes and there were like kind of only a few majors. So it was kind of very natural that we all worked together and helped each other. I think that makes a tremendous difference too, that, trying to do this on your own, which some people just feel like they have to do. It's just a very difficult road to take.
It takes 10 times the amount of work to do everything alone.
Yeah. And you don't get 10 times better.
No, you get like a 10th better when you could be improving much quicker. That is also something I wish I had done a little bit more is group work. But that's a different story for me. I do get very distracted. So I tried to do things alone. But as a PhD student now, I do love working with people. Let's move on from your undergrad. You really liked physics. You did well in courses. Then you decided to apply to a PhD. What was the application process like for you?
I applied actually to only 4 schools. I was not like dead set on going to get a PhD. I thought it sounded cool and I was good, but I was more or less happy to go get a job too if it worked out. I applied to Harvard and MIT and the University of San Diego and the University of Colorado. I kind of made potentially an error here. Like it's something I wouldn't have recommended. At the time, Harvey Mudd's in California and my parents were in New Jersey. So I was home over Christmas break of my senior year, and I said, oh, well, I'm back here now. Let me go up to Boston and visit Harvard and MIT, which was efficient. But, over Christmas break, like kind of nobody's there. And I think in retrospect, the students who were there are probably a little bit grumpy about being there. So I talked to students and nobody seemed happy at all. Like I talked to a few professors and they seemed great, but like every student I talked to seemed like kind of down. And that may be what Harvard and MIT are like. I don't know. But it might not have been totally representative. I kind of got a little bit of a negative impression of them. And then actually I visited Colorado the normal way, like applied and got invited to go out and visit. And holy cow, everyone there was just totally happy and loved what they were doing. And it was this beautiful town in the mountains. And then I visited San Diego and it just wasn't particularly memorable. I don't actually remember that too well, but I was really impressed with Colorado. So I went there. I don't feel like I gave MIT and Harvard as fair a chance as I probably should have, but I definitely think going to the place where people seem happy is a good, I don't regret that.
That is actually why I chose UVA. I really liked the buildings and the place, and it seemed like a place that I wanted to live in. So even though it might sound silly sometimes to pick somewhere because of that, I think it's very important, especially if you're struggling. If you go out and you really like the people and you like the place, it makes things a bit better.
If you guys didn't know, Cass actually graduated from Rice, so I was curious to ask him about his experience in Colorado.
How did you like Colorado?
I liked it quite well. Actually, I applied there and I got in. And then I actually got a call from one of the professors there saying, hey, would you be interested in coming and working in my lab this summer? So the summer before. And I thought, sure, that sounds great. I didn't know anything about it. It turns out it was Carl Wyman, who was one of the first people who was working on this Bose condensation stuff. That got me into the whole atomic physics thing. Before that, I had been sort of thinking to do theoretical physics. My undergraduate thesis was on general relativity. There was a guy at Colorado who did that well. But I really enjoyed that summer working for Carl, and it seemed like, they were doing some really neat things. So I stayed working with him. I did sort of part-time research over the first year as well. I actually got 2 papers out of that work, so it was pretty good. The twist is that my fairly serious girlfriend had gone to Rice in Texas, and we didn't too much like being apart. Eventually, after a year, I moved to Rice. Coincidentally, there was this guy, Randy Hewlett, there, who was also working on Bose-Einstein condensation. There were only like 4 people in the country doing it, but another one was Rice. So I was like, oh, well, that's pretty easy. I'll just go and keep doing the same stuff then.
That's good that you were able to find a program that was similar to the one that you did. So you moved to Rice. What was the culture of the program like?
Not totally an easy question to answer. So a couple things, like many places you had to teach as part of your responsibility. There, as opposed to being tied to your financial support, it was actually like a class you took. So everybody took like the teaching class, which was just you teaching. It was nice because you got like assessed in a grade, which I think is kind of useful because you get actually some feedback that I think you don't always get in other places. So that made it feel a little education forward, and I thought that was a good thing. I wouldn't mind if Virginia was like that. Also, we didn't have a qualifier exam. We just had, everybody had to defend a master's thesis. So that, I think, changes the feel of the beginning part a lot. It's more research focused and there isn't the sort of big stress at the beginning. I think that it affected the culture a lot. I think like most places, you go off to your research labs and it's more about the lab culture, right? I don't know that much about what's going on in other places. Our lab was great. We had a thing where the whole lab would go out and sit and have lunch on a picnic table every day and chat about life. And our advisor was always around and there was like 2 experiments with, 4 people. It's about like my lab is now. He was pretty young. It's like when I started there, he'd maybe been there 4 years or something. So he was still, things were set up, but it was still the beginning times.
Did you have to build a lot of the experiment?
Yes, we built up our experiment and a few iterations of it, actually. Yeah.
Did you ever feel like you wanted to quit academia and go into industry?
All through grad school, I was not really committed to being a professor. Like I was enjoying it, which is advice I try to give now too, is like go to grad school because you want to go to grad school, not for some goal afterwards. As I progressed through grad school, I sort of liked the idea more. Like I was enjoying the research and I did enjoy teaching quite a bit too. I think that was probably the biggest determinant of it was that I liked teaching a lot and I could see myself with that kind of career. And I liked research well enough and it seemed to be going well. So then I said, I'll try to do a postdoc and see how that is. And I like that too. And so then I said, okay, I'll apply for professor jobs. Even at that point, I mean, if I hadn't gotten one, I don't think I would have been like heartbroken or anything. I would have been happy to go get a job for a company too.
I guess it's good to keep your doors open since becoming a professor isn't necessarily the easiest thing to do. But you did apply for a postdoc. What was applying for that like?
So it was pretty easy for me. There still is this national postdoctoral fellowship program, the NRC postdocs, that you go. And so you apply to that and then you go work in like a national lab. So I worked at NIST back in Boulder. I got to go back to Boulder for 2 years. So that's like its whole special program. So that's a big complicated application. But like my advisor had worked for the person I want to do the postdoc thing. So I had it in there. So I talked to them about you have to make a proposal and all this. But it's very formal and clear what to do.
That's actually kind of funny. You went back to Boulder. I guess you had to be there at one point or another. How was the application process different to the PhD?
It's more involved than that. There's many national labs. So it's kind of like if all the grad schools had one uniform application process. The big thing was you did have to write a 4-page research proposal. Not necessarily we're going to do, but you could do in the lab you're going to go work for. And then they sort of evaluated you based on that.
So would you say that in your PhD, trying to get involved in making those research proposals would be a good idea if you wanted to pursue a postdoc?
It's great to be involved with that. And actually, you all should be asking to read all the proposals that I do. As an advisor, I don't want to really tear you away from stuff too much, but reading them and talking about them and giving me feedback and understanding why we did the way we did is a totally valuable thing.
That is good to know. I might try to read some research proposals now that I'm a little bit more settled in the lab. Was the actual postdoc similar to the PhD? How did that differ?
Postdocs are great. There's nothing else but research, mostly. I mean, there are different ones, but for the most part, you're just doing research. You don't really have any of the responsibilities to manage anything. I mean, you're sort of generally mentoring graduate students and such, but it's not your job usually to go get the grants or anything. The other thing, though, is what you're doing now in grad school. I'm sure it seems hard and it feels like you never get anything done. And it's just there's definitely days where it's frustrating. The thing is, you are really learning how to do research, which you just don't recognize, or I didn't anyway. By the time I was done, it's well, I did some cool things, but I don't know. And then you go to your postdoc and it's a whole new lab and a whole new setup. And in my case, a slightly different field. And in a week, you're totally on top of it all because you've just learned how to do this. It really shows you that, wow, grad school teaches you something. So basically, you have 2 years of doing it where you're really at the top of your game and you don't have any other responsibilities and you're just I'm going to make this cool experiment work.
It's good to hear that at some point I will be feeling like I'm on top of what I'm doing. So you finished your postdoc and you applied to be a professor. I have never done that. So what is that like?
So you go and you read back then, and I think still today, you get the Physics Today physics magazine, and there's all the ads in the back that say who's hiring. So in the fall, you look for that and see, okay, here's what's open. These are the places that I'd be interested in living. So then you apply to all of them. I applied to 6, I think. And I got interviews at Rice and Virginia and University of Oregon, which actually was particularly interesting to me because I have a bunch of family in Oregon. So it was I could go there. So I went to all of them. I think at Oregon, it was fine. I don't know if either of us impressed each other very much. I didn't get an offer from them, and I wasn't sure I would have taken it. Like, they had some good things going on, but I don't know. It didn't feel like the best match. But Rice was great, and Virginia was great. I more or less decided on Virginia because I'd been to Rice. Like, I think if I'd done my grad school somewhere else, I probably would have gone to Rice, but it felt like I wanted to go somewhere new and do something different and meet new people. So I came to Virginia.
I kind of understand that. It is fun to learn new things in new places.
Speaking of new places, if you haven't noticed, I have a little bit of an accent when I speak. That is because I was born in Bolivia, and I lived there for 14 years before I moved to Canada, where I lived for another 10 before I moved to the US to do my PhD. Now to the actual stuff that you want to know about.
What was the interview process like?
The way these interviews work is they fly you out for a day or two and you meet a bunch of people and chat about their research, talk about your research. You give a research talk, like a colloquium about your plans or usually what you've been doing as your postdoc, and then maybe another talk about what you plan to do. That's a good chance that they get to know you, you get to know them. It's a good, reasonable process.
Is it standardized for everybody?
I think that's pretty standard.
It's nice that they're standard. You have kind of an idea of what you will go through, which I kind of like. Then you moved to Virginia and you became professor for the first few years. What was it like those first few years? What is the funding like when you get started?
Right. So you do this interview and then they decide, yes, we'd like to make you an offer. And then there's this whole negotiation where you have to come up with a startup package request, right? So the university gives you a bunch of money to set up your lab. Nowadays, that's like $1 million to $2 million. So a good chunk, because you need those very big things. So that's like your seed money to get things going. You have to bring that together and you have to negotiate over that. My experience is that universities try pretty hard to give you what you ask for. Then the first few years, you're more or less living off of that. So the way funding works is no one's really going to give you a grant, few exceptions, for the most part, until you've got some results. So you essentially have your startup money to get stuff built up and get some results that then you can use as a basis for applying for external grants. The beginning part, that's a little stressful in that way because it's like you have a sort of finite amount of time because there's also like the tenure clock. You really best get things working within 5 years because that's sort of when your tenure evaluations start to come up. And for the most part, that all goes much easier if your experiment's working by then. So you have a little bit of time and a kind of fixed budget and you have this idea and you got to get it to work.
What was it like getting all the materials? I've ordered a couple things for the lab and I know that they can take forever. What was that process like at the time?
It's slow and it was worse then. The first maybe semester was all like planning things and ordering things. I started in January in spring term. And then I think the lab was basically empty till that summer. And then I had a couple of my first graduate students who we started setting things up. And it was worse then. So when I started, the internet was there, but not as pervasive as it is now. So there was a lot more like thumbing through catalogs and calling companies and that.
I can't imagine trying to shop for some of the optical stuff without having the internet. Even when the internet, it's hard. So while you're looking for that, I guess at some point you got to start teaching. So when does teaching start for you?
This is going to vary by school, but here as part of your starting thing, they offer you like a semester relief from teaching. So you get like 1 semester off to help set up. Experimentalists almost always take that as their second semester because your first semester, you're ordering things. So I taught that first semester and then I had my second semester off. And then you go back to teaching at UVA, like most R1 places, your standard load is 1 course per semester. Then here also like halfway through, like in your 3rd or 4th year, you get another semester off.
That seems really reasonable. I guess you need time to set things up and it's nice how they give you a little bit of time off. Is there a particular class that you teach all the time? I guess you've taught me optics, but what other classes have you taught?
I've taught many things. Typically, you teach a course for 3 semesters and then rotate to something else. The first class I taught was photonics, actually, which was fun. I will say, too, so when you're first teaching, as far as I can tell, universally, you make the course much too hard. I mean, it's not necessarily bad. Students learn a lot. Was looking back, it's like, wow, I really asked them to do a lot. I taught photonics for graduate students and then introductory physics for engineers, like physics 1 for physics 2, I think, for engineers. Then I did optics and I did a big stretch of teaching our electronics lab, which was a lot of fun. I taught graduate statistical mechanics several times. I wrote a book about that.
If you want a really good book on statistical mechanics, I highly recommend Professor Sackett's. It's called Statistical Mechanics and Thermodynamics, A Practical Approach. You can get it on Amazon. Links in the description.
I taught graduate classical mechanics also, taught undergraduate E&M, and taught that undergraduate math physics course. Done everything. I taught quantum 2 a couple times also.
That's really nice that you have a lot of options on things to teach. I think it would be kind of boring if you had to teach the same subject over and over again.
Yeah, you get to request what you want to do every semester, and they try to, they have to fit everyone in and get every course covered, but they do try to follow your requests if you can, so you get a chance.
What is it like to create an outline? Do you get to do that from scratch?
No, you almost never want to do that from scratch, certainly not at the beginning. So what you do is you get the person who taught it last gives you their notes, and you more or less follow them.
That's good to hear. I don't think I'd be able to set up an entire course on my own. It's good to know that professors kind of pass down that knowledge. Other than teaching, what are the responsibilities of a professor?
It's all, the big divisions, the way we talk about them are research, teaching, and service. It's supposed to be 50% teaching, 40% research, 10% service. And what it really is for me, 40% teaching, 30% research, 30% service. So you get sucked into all kinds of service things. So that's serving on committees. One of the first big jobs I had was working on the graduate admissions committee, which is a ton of work in the spring because you get all these applications, you have to read them and evaluate them. For a while, I was the director of graduate programs, actually. So I was head advisor for all the graduate students. Now I'm the undergraduate program director, which is the even bigger job because there's more undergrads and more things going on. Serving on search committees is a big thing. When the department wants to hire a new person, the people who do all these interviews and read all the applications, that's a big job. We do teaching evaluations. So every semester, all those evaluation forms that the students have to fill out, there's a committee that reads those and gives the professors feedback and a score on that. So yeah, all these things end up taking a lot of time. And then there's applying for grants, of course, is a big thing too. That's probably lumped in under research, but it's not like research in the lab. It's research at your desk, but that's a lot of time too.
Wow. So professors have a lot of things that they have on their plates. Do you get roles based on your seniority? For example, being the chair like you are, that would probably be given to someone who has been here a bit longer.
Pretty much. All these committees, they've got faculty or members on them and doing the work. And then there's the committee chair who's organizing things. No one's going to make you the chair until you've been on the committee a few times at least. More complicated committees are usually for more senior people. We have a research evaluation committee also that every year we have to do faculty reports on what we've been doing. And then there's a committee that reads those. And that's usually more senior people because you sort of have to have a good perspective on, what's reasonable performance and what's not. Then eventually you might be department chair, which is a huge service role and a lot of work. You get off teaching when you do that. So there's some counterweights to it, but it's a big responsibility. But then, of course, that's always a fairly senior person.
That sounds like these appointments do take a lot of time. You mentioned before that you served in the graduate admissions committee. What kind of advice would you give to somebody who's trying to get into graduate school?
Though Cass's advice might be specific to physics, since that's where he has experience, I think he says some things that are very widely applicable. So remain on the line for some good advice.
Well, there's my perspective as the undergraduate director, what do I tell students about it? And then there's as graduate admissions, I can basically say what's the good strategies to help you get in? As just general advice to undergrads, I mentioned it before, is that the reason to go to grad school is because you want to go to graduate school, because you want to learn more about your subject. And if it's appealing to actually do some original science, move the bar forward, to me, that was super exciting to do. And that is what you get to do in graduate school. If those things sound good, then that's a good reason to go. The main thing is that even if you go to grad school and get a PhD, the chances of you getting a professor job are actually just pretty low. So if you're I really, really want to be a professor, I guess you got to go to grad school, but that's not a very good reason because the odds are low. Most people will go do something for a company. Maybe half the time that's actually research related and half the time not. But if you're I want to keep doing research and discovering new things, there's lots of routes to do that. If those things all sound appealing, then that's a good reason to go to grad school. As far as application advice, at that point, a lot of it's outside of your control. We look very closely at your grades and your transcript. So, get a lot of A's, take hard classes and get A's in them, but you do your best. Everyone certainly should, at this point, should be involved in undergraduate research, but I think almost everyone is. So yeah, so you take that seriously, put time into it. We don't expect you to have like major results. If you get a paper as an undergrad, that's actually still like kind of a special thing. It's great if you do, but there's a lot of luck involved in that. It's outside your control. But you should at least be able to get an enthusiastic letter from your research advisor that says what you did and that you did a good job and you worked hard at it. The thing that is under your control that I think students struggle with is the statements, like the personal statement you have to write, which I haven't had to read those in a long time. But back when I was doing it, we got a lot of very flowery, long essays about why people love physics, which was, to me, not very useful because if you're applying to physics grad school, I think it's kind of a given you love physics. Like, it's not like we pay so well to attract people who would rather do something else. I was always impressed by applications that had a fairly short and direct statement of purpose that were like, here's the research I've done, here's the research I want to do. And actually describing both of those succinctly is a good science writing skill. So able to like communicate what you did in a paragraph and have a reader be able to say like, oh, okay, I get it. That's more impressive than spending 2 pages on it. And what you want to do and how set on that you are, because of course, like I definitely want to work for Professor X is one thing, whereas like Professor X is interesting, but I'm open to lots of things. That's probably a better strategy to take. Definitely explaining weird things, like if you spent a semester abroad or like just had anything unusual in your academic background that would be confusing to someone looking at your transcript. Like that's the place to talk about what that is and what happened.
I remember writing my research statement and struggling to summarize things well and trying to get my point across without writing an entire spiel that would bore the living daylights of the person reading it.
That's right. Well, and the trick for always is to put yourself in the shoes of the person reading it who's very scientifically literate but doesn't know anything about your thing and doesn't really care about the details. So you just want to make sure that, but just hard. Like that's why it's impressive when people do it well. But that's definitely something you can get help on too. Like, ask your mentor to read it over and make suggestions and hand it to one of your friends and say like, can you tell what I'm trying to say here?
That's what I ended up doing. I passed my essay around to different kinds of people. Like my brother is a historian, he loves writing.
Great.
So he checked my grammar and my flow, and then like I had actual physicists check other stuff, and I was like, hopefully this will make it.
That's the way to go. Other than that, from my perspective, the single biggest thing was, what classes you took, what grades you got in them. To some degree weighted by the school. If you went to a school that we had never heard of, like a little college somewhere, it was a little harder for us to judge. Like if you got straight A's there, okay, you must be pretty good, but what does that really mean? But if you went to a name brand school, not like necessarily top, but just one what we knew about, and you got good grades, then okay, we knew what that meant.
How do you guys deal with having universities that might not have the same standard for grades that maybe UVA has?
I don't totally know how to answer that question. My impression is that in the U.S. system in general, and in physics specifically, what the grade means just varies. For instance, in my classes, I come up with a grading scale that's different again, and I tell it to you. But I mean, that sort of tradition in physics is to not even have a grading scale, is to wait till the end of the semester, look at all the grades and say like, I think everybody who did better than this should probably get an A, which I think is not very good pedagogy, but you certainly see it a lot. I think the general consensus is that in physics, a B means you learn the material at a reasonably good level, and A means you impressed me, and a C means like, well, you scraped by, and the D means you didn't. In U.S. schools, if you came out with a B average, people wouldn't say you can't make it, but you're not going to really impress people. You might get into some graduate school with a B average, but probably not very many.
Well, that is good to know. Do you ever look at the average of the class? Does that ever have any significance?
No, that information is just not available in any reasonable way in my experience. We do look carefully at everything. If your grades are terrible, we'll read your essay to see if there's some like remarkable explanation for that. If you got someone who had a B average, we would look very closely at everything and see what are the strengths and weaknesses here. Mm-hmm. So we wouldn't have overlooked that information.
Well, it makes me happy to hear that everything gets considered. I think when you're writing these applications, sometimes it feels like maybe not everybody will give it a look, but I'm glad to know that at least at UVA, you guys go through everything. So let's move past all the grades and all the applications and all this nitty-gritty stuff. You are a professor, and when you get in, you are an assistant professor probably. What is tenure track like?
Almost all schools in the U.S., typically when you get hired, it's for a limited term. Here and maybe most places, it's actually, I think, for a 3-year term. So after 3 years, there's an evaluation. I've never heard of anyone not passing that evaluation. That's just more or less like, okay, you've gotten started on things. Then they reappoint you for a 4-year term. So that's 7 total. And by the end of that, you're expected to have made some things work. But the thing is, 7 years, it sounds like, okay, you've got 7 years, but you get evaluated in your 6th year to decide. And then you actually are supposed to have gotten something done. So your things better be working. Like you should really have papers published by then. So really, like 5 years is really the time scale. It's actually just going to be more and more of a problem. As time goes on, experiments are getting more and more complicated because the easier things got done. So that 5-year sort of time scale to build up a lab, I think 40 years ago, that was nothing. Like it took you like maybe 1 year to build up a lab because it was just throw a couple things together. When I was doing it, that was like hard. So of the people in my field who started with me, good number of them got something working in like 3 years, which can still be done, but you kind of need some luck. Maybe half of them took 5 years and some of them were right up against the limits because of one reason or another. And I think now it might be even harder. So people take that into account. If you're trying to do something really hard when your tenure review comes up, I know there's situations where like you've made really good progress and you're just not quite there yet. And I think that's a challenge for the schools to decide what to do. I definitely know schools that have given tenure to people in that situation and ones that haven't. The other side of it is that the department and the school are heavily invested in you at this point. Most schools really would like to give you tenure. So you have to pretty clearly have things not working for that to not go.
I guess that makes it a little less stressful that you somewhat know that the odds of you getting out are lower. How much is teaching considered in the tenure track?
Very little, except in the sense that if you were a disaster of a teacher, it would be a big problem. But if you're a mediocre teacher, it's okay. And if you're a great teacher, you don't really get much credit for that. That's a sort of an unfortunate thing. It's because research brings in money. Bad thing for the school is if you get tenure and then you never get a grant again. That's the situation that hurts the most. And so that's mostly what it's about at that point.
What would happen if you never ever got a grant again? Would the university support you?
Basically, you're kind of dead weight on the department. They won't just give you money to keep the research going. They don't have money to do that. The research program would end. I wouldn't have students. That millions of dollars that they put into my startup package would just be sort of gone.
I see. I guess they make an investment on you with the hopes that with grants, you'll return that investment. And if you don't, that's kind of a problem. So that kind of makes sense to me. I guess grant writing is really important then. Considering all these things we've talked about, what is your favorite thing about being a professor?
I do love teaching a lot. I probably wouldn't be happy doing this if I didn't get to teach. I very much enjoy getting in the lab and explaining things to you guys and then having you figure them out and do them. I like the freedom to explore an idea. If we come up with something of like, ooh, this is interesting, let's spend some time thinking about this and maybe write a grant for it. That sort of be able to direct yourself and think of problems. And then, write a paper up. The satisfaction of something working, like, as you work and work and work on something, and then like suddenly it works. And that's very, very exciting and satisfying too. So, I mean, that's as far as like peak moments, those are probably them when you first get some fancy thing to work that you've been trying to do for years.
I do agree with that. I think obviously for me, the timeline is a little bit shorter than yours is, but when it's been months and that thing's not working, it's very lovely to have it come to life.
Well, like that, like your experiment with the interferometer basically was the idea I put in my research proposal that I wrote to get the job here. And we got it to work like 20 years later.
But now it works and we're improving it, which is very exciting. And now I'm a part of that, which is also very exciting. But to keep the balance on things, you are telling me what your favorite things are. Is there anything about being a professor that you don't like?
The politics. It's kind of hard right now. You kind of feel like science in general is under attack and there's funding's being squeezed. That's not a great feeling. In terms of just like day-to-day personal stuff, and I think this is just true everywhere and in companies too, UVA is a big organization and there's a lot of layers of bureaucracy. And there's definitely times where you feel like you're just want to do some simple thing and it's just like you're moving mountains to try to get it to work. Not a research thing, but just like some administrative thing. Or you have to like get some directive to do some silly thing that doesn't seem worthwhile. I mean, that's probably my least favorite, is the sort of administrative burden that just comes from working in a large organization.
I guess that's a bad thing about large organizations anywhere. But I guess the teaching and all of that makes it worth it. My last question is, what is some advice that you'd give somebody who wants to pursue academia?
Yeah, it's a thing I've sort of touched on. I think my number one thing would be it's great to be considered in academia, and being a professor is a fun life and a good job, but don't be focused on that as the goal. It's the journey to get there, because the odds of you reaching that goal are kind of low. It's a little bit like wanting to be a basketball star or play in the NBA. Like, cool, that's a great goal. People do it. But the only reason to pursue that goal is because you really love basketball. Don't force yourself to study physics because you want to be a professor. Enjoy what you're doing and keep enjoying it. Take the next steps if they feel like something you want to do. Major in physics because you're excited to major in physics. Go to grad school because you're excited to go to grad school. Be a professor because you're excited to be a professor.
That's good advice. That's actually something I liked about physics, is that it felt like if things just felt blocked and I couldn't really continue forward for whatever reason, I felt there was always an exit, and the exit wasn't too terrible, and I could continue with my life without really being unhappy about it.
I would argue that any academic discipline is like that. Like, you could pick like philosophy, right? Where it seems like, oh, what are you going to do with that? The thing is, as a philosophy student, you learned how to write really well and analyze and read really well, which are totally valuable skills. Maybe not quite as obvious with neon signs pointing them to industry, but there's many good ways to get off of that track too, if it's not fun anymore, and have a perfectly good, satisfying career using those skills you've developed.
Take it. People who say some degrees are worthless. Your skills are all valuable. Don't let anybody ever tell you that you studied something that isn't worth it.
The way they talk about it now is students should pay attention to their skills, not their knowledge. Because you major in history or something, now you know a bunch of history. Okay, you may or may not ever use that knowledge in your career, probably not. But the skills that you learned, there's a reason we teach them to you. They really are useful. And I don't think there's anything you can study in college that doesn't teach you a bunch of useful skills.
I had never really thought of it like that. There's very significant skills that you're learning, and I think sometimes it's difficult to see those skills. I think the older I've gone, the more I've noticed the things that I learned. Yeah.
I think it's actually, I mean, your experience is not unusual, and I think it's a little bit of a shortcoming of how universities and classes are set up, is that we don't spend enough time, like, when you go take a physics class, we're going to teach you a bunch of physics, and we don't really say, here's a skill that you're going to learn. We're going to use it for physics, but it's broadly applicable to a lot of things, and think of it as a skill. I think we could be better at that, but it's hard.
Hopefully, even though it is hard to figure out what your skills are, and it's kind of hard to self-assess, I hope that listening to you talk about these things will make people think a bit more about them. Thank you so much for coming to the podcast. And thank you for sharing your story with everyone here.
It's been a pleasure.
So there you have it, the first episode of the Academic Diaries. I hope it was enjoyable. If there are any questions, please leave them in the comments. I'll try to answer them or ask Professor Sackett about them. Any information on Professor Sackett will be in the descriptions. You can learn more about his physics looking at his web pages. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this, and I'll see you next time.